So welcome, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very special workshop, the first time we've done it, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by an array of people who are experts in various different parts of the electric campervan world, who are also going to be sharing their knowledge and experiences with you as well. Community is at the heart of everything that we do, so this is, as well as kind of sharing information, this is also a chance for us to start to build a community of people who are interested in electric campervans, because there are still not that many people doing it. And so we need to be, and there are some specific challenges to overcome, so we need to be really starting to build that sharing of information so that everybody's learning from everybody else. We're really excited about electric campervans. We believe that they are a very exciting window into a future of really sustainable travel. I mean, one of the reasons that we got into this business in the first place was because we thought that campervanning was a great alternative to flying halfway across the world, a great way to explore some places that are closer to home and feel more connected to the places that you're exploring, feel more connected to nature. And they are still a very low carbon alternative to flying, but obviously going electric is the next step beyond that. And, you know, not only is it low carbon, but also it's quiet and you're not pumping fumes out into nature. So it feels like an obvious next step. But obviously we've kind of been waiting for the technology to catch up with what for many of us is an aspiration. And a year ago, we started thinking seriously about, you know, is this something that could work for customers? Because it's one thing to have an electric campervan for your own use, but asking people who aren't familiar with it to use it is kind of the next step. And in this past year, we have had 4 electric campervans join the Quirky Campers rental fleet. And so far it's been a great success, and the kinds of things that we thought might be issues have not turned out to be issues. So that's kind of continued to give us more and more confidence in this being a, you know, a thing that can really start to grow. And there are many other people who've been way ahead of us in this and have got more experience of it and are also seeing it work. And so that led us to, towards the end of last year, make a commitment to a goal. I mean, I don't even know if I'm ready to say that we're committed to doing it. We're committed to trying as hard as we possibly can to make a quarter of our rental fleet electric campervans by 2025. And that means figuring out how we can kind of support and spur on the industry in every different part of it, because if people aren't buying and selling electric vans and converting them, then people simply aren't going to have them to rent out. So we can't kind of force it to happen. We can only just support it. And we're still in the early days of our learning journey, but we are committed to sharing everything we learn as soon as we learn it, and also finding people who know more than us and connecting them with you to share their knowledge as well. So that's what this evening's about. And we are really excited to share as much as we can, and then also gather questions that we might not have answers to yet and go away and figure out what those answers are. So, you know, we also realized that we're in a really unique position because the community that we're already in contact with are people who are already thinking outside the box, who are happy to be creative, who are happy to be experimental. And so I think that this community in particular are kind of uniquely well positioned to drive this forward. So that's what we're hoping that you're going to be doing. I'm going to ask for a short introduction from each of our speakers, just so you've got an idea of who is here, and then I will share the outline for the evening. So James, can I start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm James from We Are EV in Bristol, and we have 2 electric campervans that both of them we rent out, and they also serve as demonstrators. We build them to order. We're actually from an electrical background, but we went into electric car and van sales a few years ago. During the first lockdown, we couldn't sell anything through our dealership, so we were sort of scratching our heads and wondering what to do. And we thought we'll develop an electric camper van that sort of encompasses everything that we do as a business, but in one vehicle. It's fully electric. There's no gas. It's off grid, solar powered, induction cooking, and it's got its own charging. So if you're at a campsite, you can charge the van from the campsite. So it sort of encompasses all the things we do typically for people's homes, but in a van. Bit of a punt, a bit of an experiment at the time, but it's been very popular, and a lot of people who are looking at electric vehicles in general have hired the van as a kind of, you know, a feeler for whether they're comfortable to make the jump to electric.
Great, thanks, James. Kit, I'm going to hand over to you because you do something similar but different.
Perfect. Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Kit Lacey from EW Services. We specialise in converting classic VW campervans to all-electric power. We've been doing that for 9.5 years now. And we started with 1973 VW T2 for hire, and that quickly evolved into us learning a lot about the actual conversion process, to the point now where we have a warehouse in North Yorkshire where we convert about 10 vehicles at a time, and we have our own kind of complete packaged electric conversion system that contains electric motor, batteries. So we take the engine, petrol tank, gearbox out, and have a complete system that we install in its place for full electric. And that's been really popular. And one of the core things for our business is about enabling as many people as possible to experience electric classic campers. So it's not just about purchasing, it's about the hiring and partnering with Quirky to do that as well.
Great, thanks so much, Kit. I'm going to hand over to Sarah and Yureen now, because again, your perspective is quite a different one. So tell us who you are.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah. This is Yureen. We're originally from the Netherlands. I am a travel writer. Yours a photographer. We're calling in to you now, as you can see from our van, an electric camper van, a self-converted Fiat Educato. And we're currently parked in the south of France. And believe it or not, but they're cutting palm trees outside. So if there's any background noise, apologies in advance. As part of our jobs, we were sort of globe hopping on one continent one week and the other continent the next. And then the pandemic happened and sort of forced us to stand still for a second and really think about the way we were traveling. And we decided that we wanted to do it differently, more sustainably. And we started looking into ways to do that. So we looked at buying a sailboat, or maybe going on the train, but with yours heavy backpack full of camera gear, that didn't really work out for us. So we finally landed on let's go for a camper van, let's go for full-time van life. And then we really wanted to do it, go all the way, wanted to do it fully electrically. So we bought the Fiat Educato, converted that. Took much longer than we thought, also had some setbacks, but we are really happy that we did it. We've been road tripping across Europe full time for about 6 months. We're testing charging infrastructure any place that we go. We're at 10 countries, I think, now in Europe. And we're blogging on our website, greentraveljournal.com. I'll put that in the comments in a second. And we're also vlogging on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And in our short presentation, we'll talk about our experiences a little bit and our challenges and what it's like to do EV life, we call it, long term.
Great, thanks so much, and thanks for joining us. And Murray, finally, I'll come to you.
I have a kind of mix of all the stories there. Much like Sarah and Yureen, I was in a high carbon career before. I specialised in getting more planes down runways quicker as an electrical engineer, and I kind of realised that probably wasn't good, and we should change our attitude to fossil fuels quite dramatically. So as I was in the course of changing business towards EV charging and solar and all that stuff, I had a similar inspiration to James and thought, this campervan thing would be really good. So I ordered pretty much at the same time a couple of the Citroen e-dispatches for our solar and EV charging installation business, and Vivaro for conversion to campervan. And as my wife often says, the problem with your ideas, Murray, is you have a habit of doing them. So cracked on with it and built or I had it converted. I paid somebody to convert it for us. Put up the name Campervans. We've got a website that can be booked through, and it's a bit of a sideshow. You know, our other business in solar PV is growing quite dramatically at the moment, but Campervans is, you know, it gives people a good experience. We have lots of people from the Netherlands, actually. We seem to be really popular over there, and everybody that takes it out loves it. You know, they have a great time. We're based in the Scottish borders, so it's quite an easy place to pick up from the train station, drive around central Scotland, the Lower Highlands, and then pop back after a few days, and it's been a very popular thing. So
David, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm David. I one of the co-founders of Quirky Campers, and I have been dreaming of a day when we could be talking seriously about electric campervans with a large group of people for a very long time. So it's really fantastic that this is finally happening and moving forward. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've always sort of been, I think we've been a bit slow. This has been happening slowly in the background with small vehicles. Most of the vehicles from Quirky are much bigger, and so there's not been that much appetite, but it's fantastic to see this finally moving forward, and I'm really hoping that we can be the grease in the wheels to in some way make this happen and bring people together and help this move forward. So it's a really great place to be.
And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lindsay, and I'm also one of Quirky Campers' co-founders. We are wanting to cover everything this evening, which means that we're not going to be able to answer every single question on every topic, because obviously this is huge. So we're kind of aiming for breadth. And then, as I said, we're going to follow up by answering as many of your questions as possible and continuing to develop as much content as possible to answer people's questions. And perhaps we'll do follow-on workshops to address particular parts of this topic in more detail. Great. So we're going to go over some of the options for electric-based vehicles. They are infinite, so we'll just be sharing some highlights and perhaps some of the things that you might want to be taking into account when making that decision. And James is going to share some tips around how to purchase an electric vehicle. We're going to talk a bit about the costs and what are the options to help you pay for it. We're going to talk about the practicalities, range, what to take into account when thinking about range, how to charge, etc. Typical usage of campervans. We're going to talk about the specific challenges of converting an electric vehicle to a campervan as opposed to a regular diesel vehicle, and what some of the solutions are. And then we're going to address, if you are interested in renting out your van, what you need to know in relation to that. So David, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so there are two primary types that we're going to be talking about. One is new electric, where the vehicle is either brand new or a second-hand, recently created vehicle that was built as a 100% electric vehicle, which you then convert into a campervan. The other one is retrofitting electric, which is where you have an existing campervan and you take out, as Kit was describing, you take out the diesel engine, tank and gearbox, etc., and replace it with electric drivetrain and batteries. So we're going to refer to them as new and retrofitted throughout. Most of this will be in relation to new electric, because that's where there is a lot. Well, Kit will explain the retrofitting aspect, and we'll see, take it from there. So in terms of base vehicles, we've been looking into this a fair bit. What are all of the different options? And here are some of the vehicles that other people have started converting. And the boxes that we've got here just show the vehicles that are actually all essentially the same vehicle. So the chassis, the body of the vehicle is made in the same factory, and for many of them, it will. They're also, the engines will be identical, and the battery systems and much of the options. There will be differences, and the badges are different, and the pricing is different, and the availability is different. But that's what those boxes mean. This is not an exhaustive list. There's definitely others to it, but these are the ones that we have sort of come across most commonly. I have picked out 3 example vehicles, one from a small vehicle that's often used, one from a medium size, and one from a large. In the small category, we've got a Nissan ENV 200. These are actually no longer manufactured, but they are still fairly widely available. And there is a replacement vehicle called Nissan Townster, which I haven't researched at all. As we'll go on in a bit, discuss in a bit the sort of key elements of the challenges of any electric vehicle. These are the sort of key things that you need to know about the vehicle in order to look at its suitability for your needs. Small obviously gives you very limited space, but you get, I mean, the pricing is a huge factor in something like this, and this is from 15,000 is just for second-hand vehicles. Word of warning, if you're looking into an ENV 200, there was a big upgrade on batteries in 2018, so models from prior to that do have much more limited range than the 105 miles shown here. The major issue with any of these vehicles is going to be the payload and how much the conversion is going to weigh, and after the conversion is in, you still need to have sensible amount of payload left. So that is a really tricky thing to manage, and we'll go into some more detail in that later on. If we jump across to the medium-sized vehicle, I've picked here the Mercedes eVito. This is one of the first incomers into the market for the medium-sized vehicle, as far as I'm aware, and was very quickly eclipsed by the by other vehicles, particularly in relation to the range. They had a very poor range to begin with, just less than 100 miles, but they have now upgraded the battery in 2022. It's got a 100 kilowatt-hour battery in there, which has massively increased the range, and the payload is lower for larger vehicles, and the reason for that is that the larger vehicle is heavier and therefore takes up more of the total weight of the vehicle. So the total allowable mass, the maximum allowed mass, as it's called, the MAM, is 3.5 tons for these ones. Watch out though, there are other versions of it which have a much lower MAM, but these ones here, they do have a 3.5 ton, 3,500 kilo MAM, and the long wheelbase one of that, the L3, has then a payload of 716 kilos. And then finally for the large vehicle, oops, I jumped one there. We've got the Ford e-Transit. Now, there's quite a lot of excitement around this, and the reviews for it have been really good. People are very positive about the specification, and it's got a very high level of efficiency. 68 kilowatt hours of battery capacity is not particularly high, but if you look at the eVito with 100 by comparison, but it's got a range almost comparable to that on 162 miles. These ranges are obviously always in ideal conditions. There's like set European standards for what those are, but range, I'll cover range in more detail later, but that's not going to be what you get, and the way that you use the vehicle will change that dramatically. There are 25 different configurations of the e-Transit in terms of L2, L3, H2, H3, with this, that, and the other, different size, different charging systems, etc. So they advertise 25 different specifications. You can go onto the Ford website and build your specific setup, and every single element that you add will have an impact on the payload. So up to 900 kilos would be one of the smallest vehicles with as little add-ons and trim as possible. James is telling us that the eVito has two battery sizes. Okay, right, 66 and 100. Yeah, the problem with researching this is that there's just endless information, and trying to sort of consolidate and get accurate answers, and it very much depends on whether you're talking about new vehicles or you're talking about vehicles from the past, and it's changing all the time. They're bringing out multiple models every year, so it's very tricky, but I'd be really interested to get everybody's input on and suggestions on good vehicles that they've used or know about that have been used successfully, and as much detail and specifics is really helpful. Maybe that'd be a really good one for the Facebook group. If you've got any suggestions as well, then people can access it ongoingly. So the really particularly interesting thing about the e-Transit is that it has, as you can see in that top photo there, it has an onboard inverter which is connected to its traction to the traction batteries. So that is base vehicles. If we could then jump and ask James a bit more detail about it, on your top tips for buying a vehicle.
So yeah, I think David's brought up a very interesting point where the terminology and the detail are a little bit confusing, to be honest. And I think with regard to looking at a base van, really these details are very important, because advertising is often incorrect, descriptions, the established sort of network of motor trade businesses are struggling, I think, with the, unless you're from an electrical background, understanding the new units that are being used is not easy. We're all forever making comparisons to sort of your fuel tank being your battery, your range being your, you know, are you an economical driver, miles per gallon versus miles per kilowatt hour, and all of this kind of stuff, which does take a little while to figure out and sink in. So I think with regard to looking at base vans and looking at what vehicles are suitable, I would say there's a couple of things to look at. Really, with regard to the official figures for range, forget it. Like, you're not going to get what the official figures suggest. We reckon if you think about the official figure and then base your realistic range on 2/3 of that, you're probably pretty much there. You might do better, you might do worse, depends how economical you drive. But if you're buying a vehicle with a quoted range of 162 miles, good luck doing a 162-mile journey in the winter with the heaters on, fully loaded. So I think, you know, we really try and drill down on those details, because they do vary widely, and it's all about the real world experience that you're going to get, rather than what it might say on an advert, or say on the listing, or say on the a lot of vehicle advertising is automatically populated by the registration number, and the figures that you see are just not necessarily accurate. Even the manufacturer's literature is, you know, not often the most reliable. So what I would suggest is, if you're looking for base vehicles, speak to somebody like us. You know, we deal in these things all the time. There's a number of specialists across the country like ourselves who deal in these vehicles day to day, and will really be able to give you the most accurate figures, because you know, we do know people who've bought vehicles expecting them to do certain things that they don't, and nobody wants that. You know, it's a big investment. Buying a car or a van is a huge purchase. So I think just you know, seek advice from companies or places that have got that experience, and online. You know, there's a huge community of people online, and you go on YouTube and watch people's real world tests. But in terms of buying a vehicle specifically, usual stuff really. Service history, sort of important, but less so, because there's very few items to service on an electric vehicle. But you know, condition, usual kind of stuff really that you would look at with buying any vehicle. But I do think that knowing what the different kilowatt hours or kilowatts mean, because you might look at it and think that's the range, or you might look at it and think that's the power output, or the charging speed, or the battery capacity, or etc, 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 all various different electrical terms. So all which can be explained relatively simply, but yeah, it can boggle the mind a little bit.
James, can I ask you a question? So does We Are EV, do you deal in second-hand vehicles as well as new?
Yes, yeah, predominantly second-hand really. We supply new vehicles occasionally, but yeah, more often than not second-hand.
Okay, so somebody comes to you and says what their specification is, what they're looking to achieve. You'll make some recommendations, and then you go and source them a vehicle.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So David's going to talk a bit about the costs, and then we're going to talk a bit about are there any ways that you can make that cost a bit easier?
So, I mean, again, this is really broad figures that we've chucked in here. but just to give a rough sense of the different elements for a new vehicle conversion and for a retrofitted conversion. So the base vehicle is going to be anything from, this is if you're getting a new vehicle, 25 to 80 grand, depending on the spec that you're going for secondhand vehicles. Obviously that can come down quite significantly, as I was showing you there was, I looked and found some ENV 200s for 12, as little as 12,000. The conversion is actually not going to be hugely different from a normal conversion of a diesel vehicle. There isn't, from a technical point of view, there is definitely some differences, but there's not necessarily going to be additional costs in there. It does depend a little bit on what you are looking to achieve. But broadly speaking, some of the higher end conversions are just where you've got, extensive water tanks and showers and water heaters and all that sort of thing, are just not actually feasible because the payload doesn't allow. So that will make some savings, if you like, there. It'll be a simpler conversion. So broadly speaking, you're looking at around about the similar band if you're commissioning somebody else to do it. If you're doing it yourself, obviously, then that is very much down to your creativity and ability to do things cheaply. So you could be looking at around about 50,000 for a brand new vehicle with a conversion. For retrofitted, Kit will give us some more detail on that, I'm sure, but he has kits there for selling setups for between 40 and 65,000. The Campervan is, it could be something that's an heirloom that's just in your family already, or it could be an incredibly expensive, I don't know, period piece that's been involved in a film or something like that. So that's just how long's a piece of string.
Kit, did you want to add anything to the retrofit?
I suppose I've got a bit of a slot later on, but a very quick one there is, it's the retrofit. It's probably best in this context to think about retrofitting as the other side of the coin, in that most of what we're talking about this evening is taking an OEM manufactured electric vehicle and kitting out the interior to make it a camper. eDubs is doing the inversion of that, so it's taking what is already a pretty decent camper and changing the running gear of it. But yeah, David hinted there from the cost perspective, there's again a big difference in that a classic campervan doesn't depreciate in value, it appreciates. So you can treat it more like an investment. So you'd purchase a really decent campervan for anywhere between 15 and 30,000, and then the electric conversion is on top of that, but is a modular conversion that can stay as is or can be upgraded as the years go by and as newer technology comes out. So it's more of like the eDub method is more of like a campervan that will last you 15, 20 years or so, because you can just keep adapting the little pieces of the technology. So yeah, but I'll probably go a bit more detail of that later on.
Great, thank you. So how to pay for it? So a few things to note. So the plug-in grant that has been discontinued for electric cars is still continuing for many vans. I think it's commercial vans. So that's up to 2,500 for small vans and up to 5,000 for large vehicles. If you are buying it from a dealer, that's just automatically taken off the purchase price. So there's nothing, you don't need to apply for the grant. There is a list, actually, maybe Lauren, if you could share it in the chat, of all the vans that are eligible for the plug-in grant. Other things to bear in mind, there are savings on running costs for electric vehicles. They cost less to maintain, the fuel is less, and they are you don't have to pay any road tax until April 2025. I did actually read an interesting study today that said that for electric cars that over a 7-year period you do actually save money, despite the fact that they're more expensive to buy new. I'm not sure if that's the same with campervans, and obviously it's a tricky one to compare, because generally when somebody's buying a vehicle to convert into a campervan, they're buying a second-hand vehicle, so having to buy a much newer vehicle always feels like a bigger investment, but obviously it will retain more of its value. We were kind of briefly discussing on email with James about finance, because I know that he is able to provide finance for electric vehicles. Whether or not the finance provider would be happy for that then to be turned into a campervan probably need to be discussed on a specific case-by-case basis, but that's something to think about, is getting finance for a base vehicle if you were then able to fund the conversion yourself. And then this was my mini pitch. My bigger pitch will come in later, for the fact that if you rent it out, that's a great way to help you recoup those costs. So I'm going to pass over to David now, who's going to talk about the practicalities.
Yeah, so as James was alluding there, the top question that comes up with campervanning in an electric vehicle, and one of the reasons why it's not been done more, is because of the concerns about range and weight. But range is the top one, and the things that affect range first and foremost are the size of the batteries, and that's measured in kilowatt hours. So kilowatt hours is effectively like a literage of your battery. So the kWh, if you see that anywhere, that is a volume of battery storage. 1 litre of diesel, just to give you a sense of comparison, is equivalent to 10 kilowatt hours of power. So a battery with 45 kilowatt hours or 100 kilowatt hours in it is going to be just a few litres of diesel. So these are very efficient machines in many ways, and diesel is a really terrible way of consuming energy, but it is incredibly dense. So you can get 10 kilowatt hours of power just into a single litre, which is really quite phenomenal. So the size of battery will seriously impact on the range. A really broad rule of thumb for vans would be about 2 or 3 times the kilowatt hours. Gives you an indication of the range, but there's a lot of other factors in there that will have a huge impact. The size of the vehicle has a big impact, because more wind resistance makes a huge impact on how far you can take that same vehicle on the same amount of power. The weight of the vehicle with friction and all of the other things that come with accelerating weight, etc., has a big impact. The outside temperature has a major impact. Some vans, as I was recently learning from Sarah and Yureen, have heater jackets around the batteries to warm the batteries up, and the energy lost in heating up the batteries is less than the energy gained out of those batteries being warmer. So the outside temperature, there's only newer vehicles that will tend to have those sorts of technologies, but that will significantly improve your range in colder temperature. But the outside temperature has a big impact on how far your vehicle can go. There's just not the same amount of power. Your driving style, and that is primarily 2 elements, is just the level of acceleration and braking. If you're braking so hard that your brakes are actually being used and it's not regenerating the power into the batteries, and that you're just losing a lot of energy into heat, and the faster you accelerate, the more energy you use on a per mile basis, and then the speed that you travel. So if you drop down your speed from 60 miles an hour average to 50 miles an hour, you can save that 10 mile an hour difference can save you as much as 14% in less energy used. And then finally, if your vehicle has heating and cooling system inside, which most would have heating of some kind, if you're running that, so on a hot day, if you're running the aircon, and that will significantly reduce your range. And if you're running the heating on a cold day, that will reduce your range even further. Heating has a huge impact on energy consumption. It's heat from electricity is very inefficient generally. Different vehicles do have different systems, so some of them will just be using a very old-fashioned heating element. Others will have heat pumps of some kind, an HVAC system. So it does depend. But all of these elements will affect the range. So the stated range, as James was just talking about there, is very much an ideal figure, and there is a standard for what conditions that is for, but it should be comparable from one vehicle to the next if it's correct, and it's very often not correct. So if you're buying a second-hand vehicle and you see an advert, it could be that what's stated on the advert is been taken off the internet somewhere but doesn't apply to that vehicle at all. So getting accurate information is always challenging. This is just to give a bit of an understanding. So the range element is people are very worried about range because we imagine that our usage of vehicles is actually different from the reality. So most car trips are average at 10 miles an hour, or less than 10 miles an hour. So sorry, 10 miles distance. Just to give you an example, we're talking ranges here of 90, 120, 190 miles on a single charge. So even if that is performing significantly less, a taxi, which is driving a lot of the day, is on average doing 60 miles in a day, and a delivery van driver is doing somewhere between 60 and 100. So those sorts of, that's for that use case, particularly in the city where it's just little short hops and charging infrastructure is very dense and free and relatively easily available. That makes absolute sense. The situation for campervan traveling is quite different. It's a very different use case, and we're wanting to travel long distances to often a remote destination where charging infrastructure is going to be much more sparse. So some additional planning is going to be needed. However, Quirky Campers has 2,500 bookings in 2022 last year, and the average per day on a per day basis across all of those bookings was just 85 miles a day. Now, obviously, the first few days, or the first day and the last day of those bookings is often going to be a higher rate. But what I did was I looked into some tracker information on some selected vehicles, some of our most popular vehicles that have been out for well over 100 nights each this season, and discovered that 45% of bookings never exceeded 100 miles in any given day on their trip. So sometimes they were up to 100 miles, but most of the days were well below that. And if you put that limit back up to 200 miles, that applied to over 75% of bookings never exceeded 200 miles. So that means that 85% of bookings are averaging less than 100 miles per day. And the point of sharing this is just to let people know that the real world experience of people using campervans is actually not going to be outside the capabilities of these vehicles. And so that the change in behavior needed in order to make this possible and to achieve all trips is actually not as big as we might imagine. Did that make any sense, Lindsay? Did that get the message I'm trying to get across?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
We're going to hear from Murray now. Murray, you're going to share a bit about charging infrastructure, where it's at and where it's going.
Yes, so charging infrastructure has grown a long way. I got my first EV in 2015 and drove up and down the country using only AC chargers on the crappy Ecotricity things, which had about a 30% chance of working. So when I hear people complain about it now, I'm like, it's easy now, no problem. So one of the things that's a bit different with Campervans is that most of our customers go to Scotland because we're right on the border here. And one of the things the Scottish government did quite early on was invest in a charge point network operator that was publicly funded called ChargePlace Scotland. It's not the best, don't get me wrong, it's probably had its day, I would say, but it was a good way of selecting either the chicken or the egg and getting infrastructure investment going. So the way we've done it with the Campervans is that we give a ChargePlace Scotland membership card, which is actually just on the same account as all our company vehicles. And that goes in the sun visor, and the people renting it from us can just scan the card wherever they want, and that's included within the rental cost. And then the other part of our deal is that, you know, if you use an Ionity charger or BP Chargemaster or something that's not on the ChargePlace Scotland network, then you pay for that yourself. So I tend to think that the infrastructure is quite well suited to campervanning, and this is one of the reasons that creating this appealed to me so much in the beginning when I first came up with the idea, is because if you're sitting around for 45 minutes to an hour in a campervan, you can do stuff, you know, you're not just sitting in a car. So I think a lot of our customers pop the roof up and make a bite to eat or relax or something like that while charging the van. quite a lot of tourist attractions have a slow charger outside, and that's quite useful as well for grazing on. So we haven't really had any issues with infrastructure from customers in terms of not being able to go there. One that came up, I did have to get a train up to Inverness or something once because the customer lost the card, and they had a hotel booked, and it was their honeymoon, and it was all a bit stressful. And basically there was no way to do it because the chargers further north didn't work with a contactless debit card. So they had to have this membership card or their honeymoon was ruined. So I got my mailbox finally under control by sitting on a train to Inverness and back again. So in general, there's definitely enough infrastructure to do it. I know there's been some negative social media coverage recently about queues at charge points and so on. We get a little bit of that, but really it's not a big problem. So the one that I don't think has really been addressed yet, I'd be interested to see if anybody else knows about this as well, is most campsites are not aware that an electric camper van is actually a thing yet. So most sites will provide electricity for a £5 and not realize that you can actually suck quite a lot more than a £5's worth out of it. So I think we provide a granny charger, as it's called, a slow charger for plugging into a 60 amp socket at a campsite. I don't think it's actually used that often. I've been surprised with the number of customers who like to go like wild camping and don't actually use sites so much. So I think most of the charging is done on rapid sort of tourist attractions, and that seems to be the way to go. And certainly part of the adventure, is something to do together, planning the trip, finding the right chargers and so on. And yeah, we're a small country, so it's not necessarily that far between them either.
Great, thanks so much, Murray. One of my sort of long-term dreams is to create a map of like the chargers in the most beautiful locations across the whole country, so that people can then just plan their whole trip around visiting beautiful charge points. So Sarah and Noreen, we're going to come to you now to share your experience of traveling around Europe, because I imagine that's something that people will be very interested to know. It feels like something that might be quite challenging, so we'd love to hear your experiences.
Yeah, it definitely is challenging in some ways, but then in a lot of other ways it is quite similar actually to driving a diesel or a petrol van. Yeah, we do see it as sort of a dedication to slow travel. We do drive slower. So on the highway, we usually drive about 90 kilometers an hour, which would be 55 miles for you guys. We stop to charge more often, as was already said. We take longer breaks, which is really not a bad thing at all. We always have our ABCs in the head, which is always be charging. Yeah, when you're at a tourist attraction, there's a slow charger there, plug in. When you're doing grocery shopping and there's a charger there, plug in as well. Yeah, there's definitely a bit more planning to it. If you're going country by country, you really have to look at what's the terrain. Are there going to be lots of hills or mountains to drive up? What's the charging infrastructure like? Are there any fast chargers, or is it really slow? So we do, I think, look at apps a lot more before setting out than you would do with a regular camper van. And we share some of our favorites, by the way, charging apps, stuff like that on our blog as well. And yeah, we always have to keep our range into account, of course. Our average range on the highway in good conditions is about 250 kilometers, which would be 155 miles. So, of course, that is a bit less than most campervanners would be used to. And then, as was already mentioned, the challenges with the cold temperatures are less range, which is not great. And heating, we're doing everything in our van fully electrically, and heating fully electrically is hard in winter. Yuri will tell you a bit more about that. But yeah, apart from that, it is super similar. And of course, we have some really cool perks that you don't have with the petrol van. Like we drive super silently, which is lovely. It's just a very good experience. Low emission zones all over Europe are popping up more and more. That's a non-issue for us, so that's really great. And it's also becoming easier and easier as charging infrastructure is just rapidly expanding across Europe. And we love it. And we actually, maybe good to say that we actually don't charge our van at campgrounds, because we feel like if we start doing that now, we will ruin it for all the electric camper vans that will come after us. Because with electricity prices being what they are in Europe right now, it sort of feels like stealing a little bit. Like you don't go to a campground and expect them to like fill up your petrol can for them. So we don't really do that unless they offer it themselves, or you can pay per charge, or pay
for usage.
Pay for usage, or like add an actual charging station, which more and more campsites do have. So that's a nice thing.
Yeah, we come across campsites that have charging infrastructure there. So that's based mostly on the parking lots and not on the campsites themselves. But we're trying to convince owners to make some dedicated spots for electric camper vans as well.
Which would be really good.
Yeah.
And then as for converting a large EV van, you will tell a little bit about that.
Well, I think all the big things are already said. Weight is the biggest issue. We wanted to stay under the 3.5 tons because we want to potentially rent out our camper out in the future. So then the 3.5 ton is a driver's license issue. They're changing it in Europe. David told us maybe they're doing something similar in the UK as well. So you can do a heavier van with the same driver's license, but that's a whole different issue. The biggest issue is the weight of the batteries. We have new batteries, 650 kilograms of weight is already gone because you have batteries, traction batteries. That's about 1400 lbs, I believe. So you have to work with lightweight materials. We use aluminum extrusion profiles, so you can bolt those together and make super lightweight, super sturdy frames for closets and the bed and everything you need. The other thing is, do you take all the energy out of the traction battery, or do you have a separate house battery? We opted to do a separate house battery because we didn't want to lose the warranty on our new electric van, because if you tinker with the battery or anything in it, the warranty is gone, and if you need it, it's really good to have. And you don't want to lose, we didn't want to lose any range over cooking or heating the van. So we opted for a really big, a bit overkill house battery from over 10 kilowatts, 906 amp hours, because we do everything electrical. So heating is electric, cooking is electric, and we live in the van, so we don't want to be dependent on plugging in if we just want to work or cook or stuff like that. In winter, we still have to plug in because electrical heating is so
takes so much power.
It's so much power to heat the van. But we got 3 big solar panels on the roof, and in summer we can go out indefinitely, so we don't have to plug into campgrounds. In winter we do about 2 days, and then we have to top off the batteries. And we have one really nice thing with the big battery we have is we have a really big Victron inverter to, if we're ever out of power on the road, we can just plug in the car into our camper house battery. So the traction battery can charge from the house battery to get like 30 kilometers. It's, I think, 15-16 miles to go to the next charger. So if we're really in a pickle, we just wait 5 hours, plug in the car in the van, so the camper van in the car, and then we just charge our van with solar energy and the battery we have as a house battery. And the biggest thing we can give you is weigh your van. Every time you put something in it, weigh it. Every time you take something out, like putting in windows, weigh the metal piece you take out, because weight is the biggest issue. We actually started again, so we built a van, took everything out because we were too heavy, and we started again. Still a bit too heavy, but we're working on it.
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest tip. If you go from scratch, if you get an electric camper van and it's empty, weigh it. Don't trust what they tell you about the weight. Weigh it and then see. I think that's about it. Back over to you guys.
Thanks so much. That's incredibly helpful and really brings to life a lot of the stuff we were talking about. also, you've covered some stuff that David was going to go over, which is great because you're covering it from a real life perspective. He was going to spend a lot of time banging on about weight, but everything that you've said is very, very pertinent. Anything that you wanted to add to that, David, in relation to the specific challenges of converting an electric vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, I've been banging on about weight for a very long time, even when people had payloads in excess of 1,000 kilos on the base vehicle that they were starting with, and managed to frit that away on slate floors and God knows what. Some of the glorious, beautiful conversions that you'll see on Quirky Campers do not come cheap when we're talking in a weight budget. So you need to have a weight budget, and as we've alluded to earlier on, getting accurate information from sellers. Especially if you're buying a second, and this applies to any campervan really. If you're buying a second-hand campervan, we've seen campervans be passed from one owner to the next, and the previous owner and the next owner are completely oblivious to the fact that it's a 4.5-ton vehicle that requires a C1 license to drive, and just because it's a long wheelbase Sprinter, they've got, and that used to be a Riot van, or maybe even a medium wheelbase that used to be a Riot van, they've got no idea that they're not actually legally allowed to drive it at all. The dimension on driving limits, there's a 4.25 ton limit that the government has got. I can't remember what the special word is now. There's a special word, special permission they've got to bypass the 3.5 ton C1 requirement for alternative fuel vehicles. So that's electric vehicles and other alternatives to internal combustion engine vehicles. But this, so as far at the moment, they're consulting on it at the moment, but at the moment it only applies to commercial use, so it doesn't apply to campervans. But what that means is, and it might apply to campervans, is that you with 5 hours of additional tuition, I don't know exactly what tuition that is, but that you can, on a B1 license, which is anybody who passed after the 1st of January 1997, they can drive up to 4.25 tons on a B1 license, but it doesn't apply as yet to campervans. That may well come if they start making motorhomes, electric motorhomes, in any great numbers. But yeah, weigh the vehicle. People often imagine that you need to go to an official weighbridge to weigh the vehicle. You don't. There will be a weighbridge within 2 miles of every single person on this call. Any scrap metal place, any waste recycling place, some builders, merchants, they have weighbridges, and they have people driving in and out of them all day. Just drive up. Invariably, they'll have a great big LCD display on there where you can see what your weight is. It'll be with you in it, so you'll need to take that into account, and just drive in, then say, oh, sorry, wrong place, and drive out again, and it's no big deal. Or you can, in some cases, pay for a printout. My local scrap metal place will charge £6 for a printout. Some places will charge a bit more, but there's no need to go to the nearest DVLA place 45 miles away or anything like that. It's really easy, and you can go and do it again and again through your build. So go and buy all your stuff from Jackson Leisure or whatever, put it in, drive around again, see what difference that's made. So I would strongly recommend that, and do not trust anything that you're told. There's nothing other than, and if it comes back with a weight that you don't believe, go somewhere else, because what's important to them is the difference between the in and out weighing, and not necessarily the accuracy up to that 2 tons. So it is possible that they'll come back with an incorrect reading. So if it doesn't seem right or seems too good to be true, then that's don't trust it. Try somewhere else. So just to say, the traction batteries are the batteries in the vehicle, and the ones that are used for propelling you forwards. The leisure system is a separate system, and most people doing conversions, other than the e-transit I mentioned before, will be having a completely separate system for those. And the reason for that is that it's a whole nother level to get involved in your traction batteries. The exception would be if you're doing a retrofit, and Kit would be able to describe how that works, and those two can then be completely integrated, because that is part of the system, and that's all being built. And Kit, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is that true? You don't have a separate sort of okay. And in terms of recharging from solar, it is possible, but it's for most people's system, their solar panels are going to be too small to make any real difference, any significant difference. So that's there's a limit to how much that's going to be used.
Thanks very much. Right, let's move on to our final topic, which is renting out your electric camper van. Something that we have a particular interest in that may not have passed you by. So because that is basically our main business, that's where we're kind of focusing our energy, is that we think if we can make electric campervans available for hire, that means lots more people experiencing very low carbon holidays and lots more people making the switch to electric. So this is our big target. We're still figuring out how to reach it, but this is part of that journey. One of the things that we're doing to encourage people to really think about renting out electric campervans is that we're offering a reduced commission. So normally our commission is 21% on a booking. But if you are renting out an electric campervan, it will be only 8%, and we will guarantee that rate for 2 years. So that's because we're aware that it's going to cost you more, and we just want to do everything we can. So those electric vehicles will actually be losing money on them for that time, but it's a loss leader because we want to get the whole industry moving. So that can amount to £1,000 to £2,000 over the course of the year if your vehicle is doing well. And just to say that so far our experience has been that customers love it. You know, as I said, we weren't sure because there's always challenges that come when you've got different people using your vehicle all the time, and customers already are having to figure out, learn how the bed works and learn how the cooker works and all the little quirks. So we were curious about how they would find an electric vehicle and getting their heads around charging and all of those things as well, especially if they're not used to electric vehicles. But the feedback that we've had so far has been incredibly positive. And Kit and Murray are going to share their experiences in a moment. But people just really like to know that it's pretty much a carbon neutral holiday. They enjoy the fact that it's quiet, which is something that's also been mentioned. And they're on holiday, so actually they've kind of got the time to put into figuring out how to charge and are willing to plan their journeys around that. Worth us mentioning as well that because we do have these electric campervans available for hire, we would thoroughly recommend doing a try before you buy. So if you're considering owning an electric campervan, then definitely rent one for a few days and see if you like it, see what it's like. It's really useful for answering specific questions like, okay, so maybe I want to go for a smaller one to save costs, but actually what's that going to be like to use? Well, let's try it out. Or maybe I want to try something bigger, but how does that work for the range, etc. So definitely suggest doing that. We're going to pop in the chat a link so that you can check out those ones that are available for hire. But yeah, we're here to kind of hold your hand through that journey if this is something that you're interested in, because we are really keen to support you and get you on board. So Kit, I'm going to come to you to share a bit of your experience of renting out electric camper vans, your retrofitted beautiful VWs.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I mentioned a little bit this before, but just to kind of go over that again, we started as it was a bit of one of those silly ideas, which I think is how a lot of these things start, of kind of driving on a long road trip. And it was loving classic VW camper vans. We were aware of a few people doing engine swaps, things like that. And we kind of, my mum, who I was driving with, she, at the moment, she's a senior lecturer at Teesside University in electric vehicles and batteries, things like that. So she was a qualified person to ask, to kind of say, hey, instead of an engine swap, why couldn't we do a battery swap? So let's give it a go. So we kind of thought, yeah, how hard could it be? How many ideas start that way? And so we gave it a go. And initially we kind of thought, well, we don't just have expendable income just to do it for fun. Let's try and do it with a return on investment. So we got a startup loan, established EW Trips Limited, and did it to hire. It took us 2 years to convert. So imported a campervan, 1973 VW T2 camper called Indy, and she was converted, a complete kind of ground up conversion. She was then made available. So we started in 2013. She was made available about in 2015. We had a lot of issues with the tech. The technology was mostly a crude evolution of solar technology. So solar batteries, solar battery management. forklift motors, things like that. Not brilliant. And so as we tried to kind of upgrade it and fix it, we suddenly kind of realized that we were actually quite good at this and knew a lot more than most of the people. So we relaunched ourselves as EDUB Services that covers EDUB trips and EDUB conversions a few years back, and that's been going from strength to strength. And it's still, it's a big deal for us to retain EDUB trips as part of the entire package, to move that forwards. I'm just going to throw in, because as we were talking there, I'm thinking that the main things that my topic here is about customer experiences and what people think. I'm just throwing in a testimonials link there into the chat. And those are, so that's a really quick way just to see actually what do people think of our campers, and that's what people think. So people, yeah, as we said, people love it. Most of our customers, I would go with 90% or so, have never driven electric and have never driven a classic camper. So they're completely new to it. They're completely new to the experience. And at the same time, we try to, in some level, kind of spoon feed that experience. So we give a ton of advice around local tourist attractions and places to visit and our favorite places to go and where we know there are good chargers. So near us is Fountains Abbey, which is a National Trust location. Absolutely gorgeous, and they've got 7 kilowatt chargers in the car park. And we kind of say to people, use them, you know, always be charging, as the guy said earlier. But it's also it's little things like, you know, the chargers are right next to the building, so don't worry about trying to find the charger in the back end of the car park. Like, just park there because it's actually closer than the disabled spaces for some reason. And they were free last time I went. So we're all about creating those kind of experiences. And again, as we've mentioned before about charging on the campsite, we try and be really clear with our customers about what that looks like. So you're right, most campsite owners aren't aware that you're taking a ton of energy. We try and encourage people to be really honest, because again, we don't want to run up a bad reputation with campsites. But at the same time, the way that we personally sort out kind of charging costs is we say to people that our tag is there's no charge to charge. So if somebody goes out and they incur an additional fee for charging, whether that's a public charger or a campsite, we cover that. So we'll just say, just show us, you know, however much that was, or keep a receipt, and we'll just refund you and work that out. And that's worked quite well for getting people over that. It never happens. even if there are a few occasions where people go to Scarborough and they have to pay, you know, £2.50 to charge up in town centre. They come back and I'm like, oh, you know, should we do? And they're like, no, it's no big deal, because they see it as part of the experience. So for us, we find that works really well. To show, I suppose, to show that we are really keen to make sure the transition and the experience is as smooth as possible. And so that's kind of how our, so there's a couple of links in there. That's throwing in the 2 campers. So we have 2 camper vans available for hire. Indy, the original that I was talking about, our latest camper van, Maggie. She's the new version, so she's using our new conversion kit style of camper. So no gearbox, no manual transmission, it's all automatic. This one actually uses a Tesla drivetrain and a complete brand new battery pack. So it's not reclaimed batteries now, as they're brand new. And again, because we are, that answer to David earlier on about what the kind of technology is like. And again, David hinted at this, where the technology in new vehicles is constantly changing. And we're kind of keeping up with that as best that we can. So every time, and that's intentional. So everything that we're building is very modular. So we can kind of say, we're going to be adding CCS rapid charging. That kit hasn't been available until very, very recently. Ideally, it's arriving in the next few weeks. And then we've also got kind of bidirectional charging arriving very, very soon as well. Once we kind of have those things, then it kind of becomes a full package, I think, for what we can offer. But yeah, we found that the experience has been really, really great. Everybody really loves it. Even when we've had, you know, people who've run out of range, or it's been freezing cold, or, you know, everything possible that could go wrong, we still get, you know, 5-star reviews on the back of that, because people just really, really love the experience. So I think if you're first of all, if you're thinking about trying it, then do go for it, because and there's, as we mentioned, there's a few campers on Quirky to check out, but also if you're thinking about going down this route of having a camper to then offer to other people, it's really great, because most people, we found more than we were expecting, really, really love it. So that's been great.
Thanks so much, Kit. And I'm just going to come to you, Murray, for any additional thoughts, experiences on renting out your electric campervan.
So yeah, renting it out has been very similar experience to Kit, actually, in that everybody loves it. And I've had some where there's been, you know, problems during the trip and so on. I thought, oh no, they're going to leave a bad review and it's all going to be really stressful. And they come back and say, oh yeah, it was great fun. We had a great time. So it's generally a positive thing. In our first season, I actually had quite a lot of EV owners, because one of the initial bit of publicity I did was posting it on a Facebook group for EV owners. So quite a lot of real enthusiast electric vehicle drivers wanted to try it out because it was a camper van. So I probably had the kind of 50-50 split of people who were new to camper vans and who were new to electric vehicles. So that was quite interesting to deal with. But they all had, yeah, like I say, everybody had a nice time. They everybody likes the van, everybody wants to keep it when they bring it back. Although they never offer enough money to do that, but they do always make the comment that they'd like to keep it. So it's a popular thing, and not a particularly tricky thing to do either. So I think it is a good way to finance one of these things, is to make it into a revenue stream rather than just a cost for somebody that wants to own a camper van. And at the moment I'm using it as my daily driver as well, so I use it as my site office while it's not really rented out much in the winter, so I can
you're really getting your money's worth.
Work on a roof, make decent
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing for us to point out, is that, you know, we're not talking about renting it out just as a business, but as a great way to fund an electric camper van that you can use yourself as much as you want and make the finances work. Because as people have commented, you know, financially it is still a huge challenge. It is still a more expensive option. But this is one of the ways to make it work. So I'm aware we're out of time, so I will close out now. But just to say that I am going to be collating the questions and answers that we've had in the chat so that we can share those. And my plan is to make it into a Google Doc that everyone has access to. So if you want to add more questions to that, and then we will do our best to continue to respond to those and figure out also how to package this ongoing information that we want to share in different ways so that we can keep sharing with you. I want to say a huge thank you to Murray, to James, to Kit, to Sarah and Noreen. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge and experience, because it's really brought it to life. So we're not just talking about it from a theoretical perspective, but very much from lived experiences. So much appreciated, and thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for being at the vanguard of this movement. We really hope that this has given you food for thought, some answers. I imagine it sparked more questions as well, but we hope that it's given you an appetite to take this journey to the next step, and look forward to supporting you in any way